When Classic Plus finally happens, it's clear to me that it's got to be more than just another re-release of vanilla, and one of the most core parts of the game that must change will be the classes, because Classic World of Warcraft for an MMO has been in a really weird place for a very, very long time. These types of games aren't supposed to ship with one version of class balance and then just leave it frozen forever. Whilst things started off very no changes back in 2019, things have changed over time. The further we've run down modern classic expansions, the more custom balancing Blizzard have been willing to do, with Mists of Pandaria seeing by far the most changes as the patches progress. And Blizzard have also had plenty of experience trying their hand at balancing in Season of Discovery too, and seeing how they can fit every single one of Vanilla's classes and specs into a framework where they are wanted and fun to play in all areas of content. So what I wanted to do today was run down every single Vanilla class and their main weaknesses, going from the most well-rounded classes to, for me, what are some of the weakest in the game. The goal here isn't really just to say, let's put on this ability from a later expansion to fix the class, because it's kind of already been done, and whilst it may fit in certain circumstances, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all kind of solution here, because if we just add on purely things from future expansions, are we really playing Classic anymore? That will be a difficult thing to balance, and not something I envy Blizzard having to work out, but they must do all the same. The main goal for me here is to highlight the core weaknesses that every single class in the game has, where I think there is a lot of room for improvement. So with that said, these are the 9 vanilla classes in my personal order from the best off to worst off, with the weaknesses that I think Classic Plus should be considering. Before we go on, I want to share something with you that might just help if you've ever struggled with your connection at the worst possible moment, and that is Gear Up Booster. Even in Classic WoW, your ping absolutely still matters, and when it's bad you feel it straight away. In Hardcore, one bad lag spike or a disconnection mid-pull can end a character you've pulled weeks into permanently. In raids, lag can cause annoying delays ranging from the inconvenient to the ones which can wipe your group, and PvP is the same story. A split second of performance drop is the difference between a win or another loss, where you can only come up with excuses. A lot of this comes down to distance and congested routing, which is outside of your control, where your world latency can jump up suddenly into the hundreds, and that's the problem that Gear Up Booster is built to solve. It uses dedicated private lines and smart routing to shrink that distance and lock into the lowest ping for your realm, so 100 plus ping will become something much more manageable, and it will stay there instead of spiking back up again. Gear Up Booster also has anti-jitter routing bypasses, your abilities will be firing off way more quickly, and its multipath redundancy keeps you online when your ISP would otherwise drop you, and the best part is that it is all super simple to set up. So if your connection's been letting you down or you're playing across long distances, Gear Up Booster is absolutely worth a try. Head down to the link in the description or the comment and use my code to get started today and see how much of a difference it can make for you. So Mage for me has always been the best all-round class in vanilla, and by some margin as well. I often call it the original hero class instead of the Death Knight because it can just do everything, can't it? Best AoE damage, best caster damage in raids, best gold farmer, best world PvP class, free food and water, portals for the whole group, 2 relevant damage specs. I mean, the list just goes on and on. The Mage is incredible in vanilla. Its main limitation is a mana bar, but that's fine. It does need some kind of notable weakness for all this power. Vanilla is a slow-paced game after all, so that's fine. I wouldn't touch necessarily their mana costs, but their first real flaw for me is during endgame they are very much just a one-button rotation class. And this is going to be a repeating criticism of many casters, as I'm sure you can imagine. I'm not looking for a half a dozen button rotation here from vanilla, but perhaps maybe just 1 or 2 other keys to keep things more interesting. And then there is the arcane tree, which really is in a weird spot. Honestly, it's more like a support tree which props up the other 2 specs rather than a real third option. And it is funny to say that because at the start of vanilla, when mages are all frost, they're actually not frost, they're all playing arcane to get arcane power. People just call them frost because they spell frostbolt, and the reason why is because arcane does not have a good filler spell. Arcane missile sucks, and arcane blast, I mean, doesn't exist. I'm not sure I'd necessarily want them to just have Arcane Blast because it just feels like the TBC and Beyond identity of Arcane as a spec, but if Arcane Missiles could be, you know, not so bad, maybe there's room for improvement there, though this would affect PvP too with your ability to hit around line of sight. But as far as Mage goes, it's really just the 1-button rotations at endgame, and the Arcane tree not really being its own thing. The second most well-rounded class for me, and the one in the second need of the fewest changes, is the Warrior, because they're also really really good in vanilla, as I'm sure you know. Best damage dealer, best tank, best scaling, and it gets it all through rage. And in vanilla, rage generation isn't normalized, so the more damage your auto attacks are dealing, the more rage you're getting. Warriors will always eventually be the best DPS in the game if they keep this formula, by the way. It is just kind of destined to happen. No other class scales as well, and they have some of the best critical strike modifiers in the game. As much as I'm expecting changes to classes, warriors will eventually be the best every single time. This even happened in Season of Discovery eventually, by the way. Apart from their PvE dominance, Arms is also fantastic in PvP with some support, and needing some support is fine, it's an MMO after all, right? But the awkward part of the Warriors kit has always been protection, and it doesn't really get looked at that much because Warriors are already the best tank in the game, so people tend not to worry about it. There are a handful of protection talents early in the tree which are always taken for Fury Prot, such as the bonus threat generation, shield block, and last stand, but you never really see people go deep into the protection tree. It does turn up in hardcore occasionally where survivability is the most important factor, even over threat, but typically playing vanilla nowadays, people aren't sitting there waiting for 5 Sunders anymore. They want to go from basically the first global. It's just a change in how people play the game, and maybe vanilla wasn't necessarily designed for that, but that's kind of what people expect it to be a little bit. I do love the dual-wielding Fury Prot tanking style existing though. It has evolved through things such as world buffs and consume stacking and pure player skill, but still I wouldn't want it taken away. It is cool that warriors can have this kind of berserker build where they're going all out on pure threat generation and balancing how much damage they're taking, but maybe the deep protection tree could be there as well on certain fights where survivability is really the thing that matters most. I reckon there will be dual spec in Classic Plus 2, and if this happens, I strongly suspect your tanks may be respecking if protection does become viable. I'm not sure how annoying that would be, but it is just an afterthought as well. The other issue with warriors, and this extends to other melee classes as well, is the endgame weapon choice leaning heavily on weapon skill ratios, which nudges people usually in vanilla to picking human for their swords or orc for axes. This upgrade path does niche down which weapons are valuable quite a bit, and even if other weapon racial skills are expanded to other races, imagine a new raid coming out. Does my class receive a new best weapon I can wear? If the answer's no, oh well, then the raid's not really providing upgrades. If the answer's yes, then it is. It makes it kind of binary, right? At the same time, maybe this would also keep older raids relevant and you wanting to go back to them more. This is why vanilla is such a difficult game to balance, by the way. All in all though, for warriors, they're in a really good spot. I just think it's protection and maybe weapon skill ratios that need a little bit of a looking at. At number 7, I have the Rogue, and Rogue is another class which is strong across the board. They're very good levelers, they've got excellent raid damage, fantastic cleave, and they are famously oppressive in PvP. They also have some real build diversity. You've got combat daggers, combat swords, and variations of cold blood or deep subtlety finding homes too in PvP. The weapon situation, I guess you could say, is a bit lopsided. They can also use maces and fist weapons, but you never really see anyone doing that because either swords or daggers have the best weapon specs in the combat tree. Rogues also can't use axes in vanilla, though that might just be fine as a flavor restriction. That didn't happen till Wrath originally. The biggest letdown I'd say for rogues is their damage dealing poisons, so deadly and instant poison. They only have scaling with talent points and they come with limited charges too, so you have to keep reapplying them. Also, they don't stack with other temporary weapon buffs such as Wind Fury, and you can't remove weapon poisons if you put them on accidentally. The kind of list of how bad they are is impressive. It would be nice in some way for these things to do some damage. There is also the small matter of preparation resetting the cooldown of blind in PvP. This was something that Blizzard removed during TBC and it is just so oppressively broken, I don't really know what else I can call it, but maybe prep shouldn't reset the cooldown of blind. Then again, blind can be removed via poison, so I guess there is a little bit more counterplay to it than future expansions, but it's just something I wanted to bring up. All in all though, for rogues, I think they're in a pretty good spot. It's just a bit of a lack of weapon diversity and damage dealing poisons being frankly really bad. At number 6, I have the priest. So priests typically in vanilla are healers, and they are overall probably the most consistent healers you'll find on either faction, with both holy and discipline both being playable, which is just brilliant. They're also great in PvP as a healer or shadow. They're an excellent leveler even if their playstyle isn't the most engaging, which leaves their main problem being in PvE, dealing damage as shadow. The catch here is that shadow priests are already so good in PvP, so anything you really do to help their raiding situation is almost inevitably going to make them even better in PvP, which makes this quite tricky. But the issues they have in PvE are pretty clear. Their mana efficiency is absolutely terrible, to the point where even on short fights you can burn out. They lean hard on the raid's debuff slots, and vanilla typically caps those at 16. I don't think this will be a problem in Classic Plus, but it is a problem at the moment. Beyond that, their damage over time effects are just weak offensively. In Classic, damage over time effects cannot crit and don't benefit from haste, so they only scale with spell power and pretty much nothing else whatsoever. That's going to be a repeating issue for other damage dealing over time classes too, but it especially is so for the Priest. All in all, Shadow Priests just need a bump up in damage in PvE, though I'm not sure quite how you achieve that without making them turbo broken in PvP, but hey, there we go. At number 5 I have the Hunter, another well-rounded class. Great at leveling, strong in PvP, especially in open world PvP, and it starts off the vanilla raid tiers in a good place damage-wise. It also carries a load of extra systems that no other class has to think about, such as pet management, ammo, pet training, and so on, and I really enjoy all that stuff. But perhaps a hunter feature I don't enjoy quite so much, or not necessarily just a hunter feature, but hunters will experience it the most, will be the dead zone. So the hunter's ranged attacks have a minimum range of 8 yards, while their melee can reach out to 5. So if you can keep them between those two positions, they just straight up can't hit you. And the reason I'm not fully sold on it is because it just doesn't feel terribly intuitive either in PvE or PvP. I mean, look, I'm sure you can still fire an arrow at a mage if they're standing 7 yards away from you. It can't be that much of a problem, right? And in PvE Blizzard, well, just on average don't do a good job of designing bosses that care about a class that has a minimum ranged attack range. That being said, if they did get rid of the dead zone and make it so how it is in TBC, where your melee and ranged attacks have a similar range, then you will be encouraged to do melee weaving to bolster your damage at endgame. And I'm not entirely sure if everyone wants to do that either. Then again, perhaps they should go down the Wrath route of your melee and ranged attacks having the same swing timer, which effectively kills melee weaving. Every single possible change has upsides and downsides that different people may not like. I'm starting to almost convince myself we just keep the dead zone because it's the familiar thing, even if it's not the best. Let me know what you think about that if you play a hunter though. Which version of the dead zone do you like most? The vanilla one, how it is at the moment, the TBC one, which really pushes you to melee weave, or the Wrath of the Lich King one, which makes your weapons share swing timers so you can't melee weave anymore. The other problem on top of that for hunters are their pets. They don't scale with the hunter's own stats, and they take full damage from area of effect attacks with no mitigation. So by the time you hit endgame, your pet that's been following you around so faithfully and doing so much work is kinda useless. I mean, TBC did the fix here. I said at the start of the video I'm not looking to copy-paste stuff from every other expansion, but TBC fixed this. Just hunter pets need to scale with the hunter, and they need some AoE avoidance as well so they don't just die to randomly anything in raids. The final potential problem with hunter is they have a lot of magical abilities which don't really scale with anything because you're never building spell power. Things like your fire trap, serpent sting, arcane shot, volley. They do a surprising amount of magic damage when you look at everything they have. I've been pushing for survival to be the spell power hunter instead of this melee thing for so long now. I would love to see that, highly doubt it will happen, but at the same time these abilities, again being good during leveling but useless at endgame, is another downside for the hunter. All in all, hunter is one of my favourite classes in vanilla with some rather notable downsides. There's a discussion around the dead zone to be had here. I think pets just need to be better at endgame, and they have a lot of magical abilities which could use some love. At number 4 I've got the Warlock. That was my original main for Classic in 2019, so it's a class I've got a pretty good amount of experience with. I'd say they're a good leveler, they're a great gold farmer, and they have a niche but oppressive PvP spec with souling. And they're fine in raids too, but their main job is really just putting up curses and pressing Shadow Bolt. Main weaknesses is the similar criticisms I had for hunters with their pets. They just need to scale a bit better in endgame, so I'm not going to repeat that. But the bigger mess that the Warlock has is the entire demonology tree, I think. The most popular raiding spec has you spend 21 points in the demonology tree, making your demon way more powerful, and then you pick up demonic sacrifice it to gain a buff, and then never see your demon again. It kind of just feels counterintuitive. Even though it is a really powerful talent and you have to invest a lot to get to it, it still just doesn't feel great. And the demonology tree is so full of talents which are absolutely terrible as well. You're spending 5 points here and there for a little bit of extra mana or health on your demons. Warlocks also have no hit chance talents for destruction either, making it quite a difficult spec to play early on, though with new gear coming out that should be alleviated as time goes on. There's also no threat reduction either for the destruction tree, but Warlocks are all about that risk for power kind of gameplay fantasy, so maybe that's fine. As for the raid rotation, it's kind of that same one button rotation problem that the mage has. You throw up your curse, you press corruption if you're given a debuff slot to do that, and then you just press Shadow Bolt for the rest of the fight, and that's kind of it. That's why you're there. There's also the fire destruction build, which isn't good enough to be a real alternative, partly because a bunch of bosses resist fire early on, but also because it just doesn't really have a filler spell that it can use, such as Incinerate. Again, maybe just putting Incinerate in the game isn't quite interesting enough, but perhaps there could be some room for improvement here. Affliction is also weak for the same reason Shadow Priests are, where damage over time effects just don't scale well whatsoever, and there being a lack of debuff slots on bosses. I also think it's worth bringing up Soul Link in particular because it is incredibly niche at what it's good at, and that's 1v1s in PvP. And when a good player uses Soul Link, they're kind of not really beatable. We've seen plenty of classic dueling tournaments where Soul Link was allowed and loads of Warlocks got really far, and then in some other tournaments they ended up banning the talent point because it is just so oppressive. There have been a bunch of surveys and questionnaires floating about, showing perhaps that Classic may be going down the route of getting more support for 1v1s or duels, and I just don't know if you want Soul Link to be this good in a world where that piece of content is far more relevant. I think it actually might be a bit too oppressive even for vanilla, because apart from 1v1s, Soul Link just doesn't really do anything. It's not good for farming, it's not good for PvE. In group PvP, it's okay because you're hard to kill and you're just putting up debuffs, but still it's kind of average at best. But overall, those are my thoughts on the Warlock. We have 3 classes left, and there should be absolutely no surprise to hear that there will be 3 hybrid classes. These are the ones that need the most work in my opinion. At third place is Paladin. So a lot of the Paladin's strengths sit in very narrow corridors. They're very good at 1v1 PvP actually. They can pull big packs and area farmers protection in dungeons, and they're a safe and sturdy pick for the hardcore challenge. Also, the holy spec in PvE is really their go-to. But most of the actual specs feel like they're missing something for the Paladin, and there's kind of a reason for that. The Paladin was the most reworked class in the game, going from alpha to beta to release of World of Warcraft. If you go back to the beta, the Paladin had more melee abilities, their seal spells were castable on allies, and they had an instant weapon attack called Holy Strike and another called Crusader Strike. Blizzard cut both of these before the game went live to simplify the class down, and that's why they've always felt as though they have a super simplistic way of playing. Another potential issue is that every single blessing has the same category, so Blessing of Kings, Protection, Freedom, Might, what have you. And this can be annoying at times because let's say you have Blessing of Kings on someone and you're assigned to do that, and then they get rooted in a raid, so you freedom them because maybe they're a tank and they need to get back at enemies. Then after you freedom them, you need to press Kings on them again because otherwise they are going to complain they don't have Kings anymore. They changed this system in Wrath of the Lich King, so the utility blessings with short durations are now called hands, so Hand of Freedom, Hand of Protection, whilst blessings such as Might, Wisdom and so on were kept as their own things which were longer duration. Greater blessings maybe last a bit longer too while we're on the subject. I think usually I'm okay with classes not just getting loads of quality of life pushed on them, but in this case with blessings, it is a little bit annoying to manage, I will admit. And I did play a Paladin as an alt for quite some time during Classic in 2019. Protection is also in a strange place too. It has weak mitigation, no taunt in vanilla, very mana inefficient, difficult to gear, and even the protection tree has a bunch of talents which involve getting critically hit. You really do not want to be planning to get critically hit as a tank. This is very counterintuitive. You're also hard forced to spend 11 points in the Holy Tree to grab Consecration, or your famous AoE threat will be, well, non-existent. Protection isn't too far off working, but as it's shipped, it doesn't really quite all come together. Retribution is also a bit bare bones, and the long-running joke in vanilla is that you've learned your entire rotation by level 4 because you have a seal and a judgment, and yeah, there's kind of some truth to that unfortunately. There's another problem that always comes up with Ret Paladin, and that is seal twisting. This is possible in vanilla by the way, but people don't tend to do it because A, it costs a lot of mana, and B, it doesn't really make you do any more relevant damage than what you're already doing. But I find people either love or hate it, and even in Season of Discovery where Blizzard brought it back, it was controversial when it was the top Paladin DPS spec. I do wonder whether it can exist in a healthy way for the Ret Paladin. Aside from that, the other issues Ret has is poor mana, as I just went over, lack of abilities, poor scaling, and you just don't really feel as though you're doing anything. You just kind of hit the boss and hope command procs. It's not very engaging. So for Paladin, it's mainly protection and retribution that need a looking at. And number 2, I have Shaman. Shaman does 3 things in the vanilla really well, and everything else somewhere between meh and okay. Those 3 things are really good at is playing as Elemental in PvP, where you can global people with Elemental Mastery, pressing Chain Heal as a healer, and dropping Wind Fury Totem as pretty much any Shaman spec, to be honest. Outside of that, they're kind of not that great. Shaman's mana efficiency across all their specs is just so bad. It doesn't matter what point of the game you're at, whether you're at leveling or endgame, it just feels as though your mana disappears incredibly fast. There's also some spells which I don't really understand why they are there in their current form. Like, I get they're there for flavor or something, and utility or for fun spells are fine, but can you explain to me the point of Frostbrand Weapon, Flame Tongue Totem, or Windwall Totem, because I don't really know when you use them. Another problem Shaman has is the Elemental spec has to sink so many talent points into their tree before they can get cast time reduction. I don't know why it's so low down in the tree, to be honest. It just makes it feel like you can't play the spec even if you wanted to. They can also only get spell knockback prevention from being critically struck by a ranged or melee attack, and in PvE that basically just means a melee attack because ranged attacks don't crit. On top of that, there's something else that hurts them in raiding content, and that is that nature is not covered by any curse debuff. Curse of Elements does Frost and Fire, Shadows does Shadow and Arcane, and nature is simply left out, which is quite ironic when the Curse of Elements does not consider nature an element, but there you go, it doesn't help their situation. Enhancement runs into the same mana issues and carries a bunch of filler talents that make you wonder what you're really spending your points on. Like, do we really need to spec to get parry or two-handed weapons? If other Shaman specs had the ability to do those, would it be breaking the game? Stormstrike, your big 4 fun button at the end of the tree, is also just so bad. It's expensive on mana, it's got a really long cooldown, and the debuff it puts up can get eaten by any other source of nature damage. Which means that the number 1 spot in the class that's in probably the most dire need of help in vanilla is the Druid. As much as I love the Druid, it's hard to ignore the problems. They are great at World 1-on-1 PvP, they're a top gathering class in the game, I suppose that's a strength, and they're the best flag carrier too, and all those are very, very niche strengths. The trouble with Druid is that all of those identities are either consistently outperformed with much less effort by another class, and that you have to min-max so much just to be subpar. The Feral Tree packs 2 specs, cat damage and bear tanking into a single tree, and I think unlike Enhancement, Blizzard actually did a really good job here. Both of them work, kind of. I'm not sure I want Blizzard to split them into separate trees the way Mr. Pandaria did, though I will admit I find the idea of 4th talent trees interesting for Classic Plus too. Bears themselves aren't bad tanks either, with decent single target threat and a massive health pool, but Swipe, their AoE attack, is just so unbelievably, confusingly bad. It's capped at 3 targets and for some unfathomable reason does not scale with attack power. Why did you do this, Blizzard? Druid's cat DPS spec in Feral, meanwhile, leans heavily on min-maxing through power shifting and manual crowd pummeler. And whilst that skill expression is interesting and I think it should remain a part of the class, maybe it could just be a bit less annoying to maintain than it currently is, especially when for all that effort, you're not beating a bunch of other classes anyway. Restoration is okay, but vanilla healing is so whack-a-mole that often it just gets beat out by paladins or priests. Also, if druids heal over time, effects of the same rank cannot stack with one another. Only the druids with the most healing powers effects will be applied, which makes the event of having more than one resto druid, which isn't very likely to be honest, even worse than it already is. But druids are meant to be the effective heal over time class, and as they stand at the moment, you kind of just press healing touch or regrowth with the tier 2 set bonus. As for balance, it might be the saddest case of all for the druid. They have poor mana efficiency, weak damage from Starfire, and Wrath is essentially unusable in raids because it's nature damage. Same problem as Elemental Shaman. It's another 1-button spec, and they have no reliable pushback protection whatsoever. Also, Insect Swarm is learned through the restoration tree, so you can't press that in Moonkin form either. And a final thing to say about Moonkin is their talent tree overall just feels as though it has so many talents which you don't really want to take, but you kind of have to get to the good stuff. I know with vanilla there's a lot of overlap and diversity between talent trees to encourage you to go into different ones, but here with the balance tree there's just too much garbage at the top of the tree. I think it needs a bit of a rethink. For druids, I reckon each of their specs aren't far off being good, but they are in need of the most help. So that's my personal go at all the 9 vanilla classes. Which ones need the least? to the most attention and their main weaknesses, which I think should be addressed. Across the board, there are some recurring themes here: one-button rotations, mana bars that run out too fast, periodic damage that sucks, magical abilities that don't scale with your main stat, and pets that are outscaled by their masters at endgame. What do you think though? Which one of these classes do you play the most, and would you agree that these are their main weaknesses, and are there any other things you'd like to see change with them? You can let me know in the comments down below. And, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.